One of the most innovative of all World War I technologies was the tank. The creation of the tank was a direct response to the stalemate of trench warfare. 6,000 miles of the roughly 9-foot wide and 7-foot deep trenches traced the Western Front. Barbed wire was strewn in front of the trenches, and sandbags sometimes provided a protective barrier. Machine gun nests bristled with sprays of bullets. In the desolate ribbon of no man's land between the belligerents were bomb craters, tree stumps, burning villages, and the bodies of soldiers from both sides. The challenge was to find something that would just plow through them. The tank was the answer.
There are antecedents to the tank. Da Vinci has drawings, which are these war machines, he calls them. But they didn't have the technology until they married the idea of the Holt tractor, which was a tracked vehicle, up with an armored cab, and then drive it over the barbed wire and put machine guns or cannon on it to suppress the enemy's machine gun nest.
The British quickly developed the Mark series of tanks. Beginning with the Mark I, the tank applied a host of technologies: the internal combustion engine, steel plating, mounted machine guns, plus the all-important tracks instead of wheels.
The tread is the key because it can go over terrain that no wheel can go over. It's harder to bog. And the reason is it has a broad surface area, so it has a very light pounds per square inch on the ground. So in soft, muddy ground, it has a better chance of staying afloat above the ground rather than sinking in.
With a crew of 6 men, the early British tanks could travel at about 3 miles an hour. 2 men worked the delicate 100-horsepower engine, which sat exposed inside the tank. Though the British were quick to make improvements on the Mark series tanks, they remained extremely uncomfortable and even lethal inside throughout the war.
Temperatures could rise up over 100 degrees in there. The stink of oil and gasoline and exhaust vapors filled the inside of the vehicle. The engine is right inside the fighting compartment. Driving this thing would be similar to driving your car if you sat underneath the hood with it closed next to the engine. As machine gun bullets beat on the hull, the sounds of that ringing, that cacophony, is added to the roar of the motor. Worse yet, spall splashed off the inside of the hull of the vehicle. Fragments of the steel plating and paint would cut the faces and the hands, any exposed flesh of the crewmen.
So now you've got a vehicle with no suspension system going 4 miles an hour. It's 120 inside and you're in leather. So how long are you going to last? Well, the answer is probably not long. So they had drawbacks to them. However, given the alternative, there was no comparison.
In January of 1916, the British deployed the tank for the first time.
The first tank attack in the Battle of the Somme, 36 tanks were put into place. They did almost nothing except give away the idea. But a year later at Cambrai, nearly 400 tanks were put into effect, and they busted the German trenches. It showed what tanks could do. They could bust the trenches, and they advanced 6,000 yards.
Meanwhile, the French, with the aid of the Renault company, were developing their own lighter tanks. At roughly 7.5 tons, they were a quarter the weight of the heavy British tanks.
The standard French light tank was the FT-17. It could be armed with a machine gun or a 37mm gun. It had 2 men inside. The communication between the tank commander gunner and the driver was a bit crude. The way they did that was the tank commander would kick the driver in the direction he wanted to go.
At 6 miles an hour, the French tanks were twice as fast as the British tanks. They also incorporated a rotating turret.
The French innovation of the rotating turret and tank was extremely important. Instead of having to have 6 or 8 guns located all around the surface of the tank to shoot from every angle, you could have 1 gun that could shoot from every angle.
One of only 2 surviving unmodified FT-18 French tanks was recently discovered in a dump in Afghanistan, where it had likely been discarded in the 1920s. It was donated to the George S. Patton Museum in Fort Knox, Kentucky for restoration.
This tank is operated by a series of control rods, a regular gas pedal, a regular clutch, and a regular shifter. The turret of the tank was a one-man turret. It was traversed by the gunner. It had no powered traverse mechanism, he would just lean back into 2 shoulder mounts and turn the turret. There are vision slits around the hatch. This represents the crew's only way of seeing out of the tank. This is the entrance and exit from the turret, which would be immediately over the engine deck if the turret was installed. This is the 4-cylinder power plant that we removed from the tank. It had a total power output of approximately 39 horsepower. This engine represented state-of-the-art in internal combustion technology. The reliability of the tank, coupled with its reasonable ammunition supply, would allow the tank to operate out to a radius of about 35 miles. This was far in excess of the larger tanks that were available during World War I.
Despite the effort the Allies put into these mobile fortresses, the Germans lagged behind in designing and implementing tanks.
That was smart because tanks are offensive weapons, and for the most part on the Western Front, Germany was on the defense. The World War I tanks were useless in defense.
As significant a technological accomplishment as the tank was, its impact was limited, not because it wasn't effective, but because no one knew how to exploit it. Tactical use of the tank within a limited battle or skirmish hadn't yet been fully conceived because the tank was such a new concept. Only in 1918, with the end of the war in sight, did a coordinated tank assault contribute to pushing the Germans back out of France. Still, the tank was an important new weapon that held great promise for visionary military leaders. Combined with an infantry assault that could hold on to enemy territory, the tank's aggressive drive across the battlefield would prove not to be only tactical, but also strategic. Decisive, not just in an individual battle, but as part of an overall plan of attack to permanently defeat an enemy. But its greatest military contribution would be realized in the next world conflict.